When you picture Queen Elizabeth I, you probably think of this, right? The Virgin Queen, Gloriana, just dripping in jewels, radiating power, an almost godlike figure who famously defeated the Spanish Armada. But behind that absolutely flawless public image was a much, much stranger and frankly a much dirtier reality.
And this is the quote that really kicks it all off, supposedly from the Queen herself. It just makes you stop and think, doesn't it? How could one of the most powerful and glamorous monarchs in history be, well, so unwashed?
So let's really get into this, because the story here isn't just about gross hygiene habits. No, it's a total masterclass in political performance, where every thick layer of makeup, every drop of perfume, and every skipped bath was a calculated move to hold on to her throne.
First things first, we have to understand the brand. Elizabeth and her court were meticulous. They were absolute geniuses at crafting this image of Gloriana, this perfect, almost supernatural ruler.
And this wasn't just about vanity. Not at all. You have to remember, this was a time when a woman ruling alone was seen as fundamentally weak. So this image, it was her armor. It projected strength, stability. It was meant to convince the world that she wasn't just a woman, she was England.
But let's look at the first real crack in that perfect armor. Her smile. And it all started with a very sweet and very powerful obsession.
See, in the 1500s, sugar was the ultimate status symbol. It was unbelievably expensive, an imported luxury that most people would never even taste. So Elizabeth didn't just eat it, she flaunted it. Her meals were piled high with things like candied violets and marzipan, all of it a very public display of England's wealth and its growing power across the globe.
And the price she paid for this obsession was, well, pretty grim. Her teeth were apparently black stumps, rotting right out of her head. And the irony? Her toothpaste was a paste made of, you guessed it, more sugar. Visitors to the court wrote about her foul breath and how she had trouble speaking. And she was apparently in agony or was terrified of having them pulled.
But here is where you see just how powerful her influence was. Instead of being a source of shame, her rotten teeth became a fashion trend. I mean, it's wild to think about. If the Queen's teeth were black, it meant she was rich enough to afford all that sugar. So, noblewomen at court actually started blackening their healthy teeth with soot just to look as wealthy as she did.
Okay, so let's move on to the next layer of her image, because it all builds on itself. That iconic porcelain white complexion. It was a mask, for sure, and a deadly one.
To get that perfectly pale, almost ghostly look, she used a foundation called Venetian Ceruse, and the ingredients were not great. It was basically a paste of white lead and vinegar. I mean, it was toxic paint that she was slathering all over her face day after day. And all that lead, and sometimes mercury, just soaked right into her skin, slowly poisoning her. We're talking classic symptoms: horrible skin scarring, memory loss, really severe mood swings, trembling hands. The very makeup she was using to create this image of immortal perfection was literally destroying her from the inside out.
And she controlled this image with an absolute iron fist. Artists couldn't just paint what they saw. Oh no. They had to use official face patterns, basically stencils of her face from when she was much younger. So in all her official portraits, she just stopped aging.
And this, for me, is maybe the most heartbreaking detail of all. As the makeup got thicker and her real face became more and more damaged beneath it, she just couldn't stand to see the truth. She reportedly had all the mirrors removed from her rooms, choosing to live completely inside the illusion she had so carefully built.
Which brings us right back to that famous quote about bathing. Because it wasn't just about being lazy or preferring to be dirty. In the 16th century, people were genuinely, truly afraid of taking a bath. So the belief was that hot water opened up the pores of your skin, and that would let in disease and something they called miasma, basically bad air that made you sick. But beyond all the superstition, just imagine the logistics. A bath was a massive undertaking. With no plumbing, it meant an army of servants had to heat and carry bucket after bucket of hot water. It was a huge, laborious, and in their minds, a pretty risky thing to do. So what did she do instead? Well, her whole routine was about masking, not actually washing. She would change her linen undergarments pretty often, thinking the cloth would just absorb all the sweat and grime. She'd dab her skin with perfumed rose water, and she'd carry these things called pomanders, little balls of herbs and spices, to hold up to her nose and block out bad smells.
And let's be real for a second. The palaces themselves were disgusting.
There was no plumbing, you had hundreds of courtiers living together. The smell of human waste eventually got so bad that the entire royal court would have to pack up and move to a different palace just to let the old one air out for a while.
So you've got the rotting teeth, the lead makeup, this deep fear of bathing. It all sounds so bizarre, right? But when you piece it all together, you start to see that her hygiene, or her lack of it, was actually a political weapon.
I mean, think about it. To take a bath is to be undressed, exposed, human. And in a royal court that was crawling with enemies and potential assassins, showing that kind of vulnerability, that was a weakness Elizabeth just could not afford.
So she built armor instead. Those thick, caked-on layers of white makeup, the stiff, jeweled gowns that were like a cage, the overwhelming cloud of perfume. It wasn't just fashion. It was a barrier. It was a way to keep the entire world at a distance.
Ultimately, she made a choice, a really conscious one. She sacrificed the health of the woman, Elizabeth Tudor, in order to preserve the immortal legend of the Queen, Gloriana. The mask became more important than the person who was wearing it.
And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? She absolutely mastered it. The world saw the perfect, ageless, untouchable queen that she wanted them to see. They never, ever got close enough to see the scarred skin, the decaying teeth, or the aging woman hiding underneath it all.
So in the end, her idea of being clean was completely different from ours. It had absolutely nothing to do with soap and water. It had everything to do with maintaining that image of perfect, impenetrable, and totally untouchable power.
Which really leaves us with one last question to think about. She controlled her image so completely that she basically built a prison of perfection around herself. But was she the only one trapped inside? Or was her entire court held captive by the very same myth she so masterfully created?